It is now my great pleasure to introduce to you the Honorable Mike Huckabee. Governor, please go ahead, give him a hand. He deserves it. Governor Huckabee was the 44th governor of the state of Arkansas from 1996 to 2007, becoming the longest-serving governor in his state's history. As a former candidate for the presidency in the Republican primary of 2008, Governor Huckabee won the state of Iowa, and after Iowa, went on to win 6 other states that included Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Kansas, Tennessee, and his home state of Arkansas, earning a total of 240 pledged delegates and finishing only second to John McCain. That was a lot of hard work, Governor, right? We really appreciate what you did there. In a day and age when our society needs strong and articulate voices speaking from a solidly conservative and Christian worldview perspective, Governor Huckabee is effectively meeting that challenge. And so, Governor, we thank you for everything that you're doing to support the issues that we in Connecticut care so much about. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Governor Mike Huckabee.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Boy, this is a nice welcome. You know, one thing I'm sure of, I'm not in Arkansas. I don't get welcomes like that. They've heard me too many times. You worried me, though. When you stood up, I thought you were leaving. I thought, hey, dessert hasn't even been served. Come on. Chris, thank you very much for your gracious introduction. And I want to say it's so much nicer than some I used to get when I first started running for office back in Arkansas. You have to understand, I was a Republican in a state where we were on the endangered species list. And I'm not really being very far from the truth when I tell you that. When I was elected lieutenant governor in 1993, I was only the 4th Republican elected in 150 years in that state. The only one of the state capital with a statewide office, and first one in 25 years. And they were so excited to have me there that Bill Clinton's aide, Webb Hubbell, then working at the White House in the first year of the Clinton administration, called back to the state capitol and said, look, this guy should never have won. This is embarrassing to the president that a Republican would win in the president's first year in the White House. You got to do something. So they did. They nailed my door shut at the state capitol. Now, I know that sounds like an apocryphal story, like, well, it didn't really happen. It's just kind of like figuratively. No, literally nailed the door shut with nails. The Wall Street Journal thought that it was some kind of apocryphal story, so they flew John Fund, who was working for them at the time, down to Little Rock, and he later reported that, yes, physically, the door has been nailed shut to the office of lieutenant governor so that this Republican is unable to occupy the office. It stayed that way for 59 days. In the meantime, I set up a card table, a little chair out in the hall, and I put a sign on an easel. And every day I noted how many more days had gone by that I was nailed shut out of my office. And finally, without me doing anything, because a lot of people said, why didn't you take a crowbar and open that door? In fact, some people got together and brought a crowbar to the Capitol and said, here, this will get you in. And I'd already been tipped off by one of the very few friendlies in the entire Capitol. And believe me, there weren't many. Usually if I'd get on an elevator, people would get off. They wouldn't ride an elevator with me. If I went to the coffee shop, they refused to wait on me. It was brutal. And there were a few people who were a little sympathetic, and one of them told me, he said, you know, they hope you'll use that crowbar. They hope you will just go ahead and physically open that door, because if you do, they're going to have you arrested for the destruction of state property. And they would have. Folks, it was a tough environment. And I'd walk down the hall, and people would turn, go the other way. I told my little staff, I said, guys, we don't have the numbers. I wasn't a math major, but I could count this high. And I said, so here's our plan. The meaner they get, the nicer we will be. The more belligerent they are, the more cooperative we will become. We will play a totally different game than they've ever played before. When I became governor, which, by the way, happened by the result of what was once the lieutenant governor becoming governor when Clinton was elected president, and then he was convicted in Whitewater-related felonies that Clinton escaped, but all his pals got it. I mean, it's just one of those things. So he had to resign. I became the governor. And, you know, it was kind of the remarkable experience of going into the governor's office. My legislature, I was talking to some of the legislators here, and you think you've got some number issues. I had 89 Democrats to 11 Republicans in the House, 31 Democrats and 4 Republicans in the Senate. And half those Republicans, I wasn't really very sure about them either, because they'd kind of gone native after having been there a couple of years. Today, I'm happy to report that our party, and I realize this is not a political partisan event, I'm just telling you my experience, but it went from being a hardcore anti-life legislature that never, ever let a pro-life bill get out of the Senate committee to one that passed virtually every pro-life legislation. We have an amendment to our Constitution that says that life begins at conception, and it is the policy of the state to protect it until natural conclusion. And now the supermajorities in both the House and the Senate are Republican Party, and all of the constitutional officers and the entire congressional delegation, all Republican, none of which were Republican 20 years ago. So there is hope. In fact, that's the name of the town where I was born. As was Bill Clinton. The difference was he moved away when he was 6. My family didn't have enough money. We were stuck there till I got out of high school. I want to express to you my heartfelt thanks for inviting me to share really what is a celebration of the accomplishments of the Family Institute of Connecticut. And you saw from Peter's report and also from the really magnificent video tonight that when you make contributions to the Family Institute of Connecticut, it's not just a contribution so you can say, okay, I'm going to once again bet on the losing horse. I know we're not going to win. I know we're not going to accomplish anything. But I just feel better about having contributed to our ongoing and everlasting defeat. Isn't it good to win sometimes? Doesn't it feel good? And for those of you here in this room, the remarkable news is in one of the most inarguably blue, solid states in this country, and one that the rest of the country kind of scratches our head sometimes and say, what's wrong with Connecticut? Why did they elect that guy governor? I mean, you know, we wonder. But my point being is that in the midst of this, you have created an extraordinary movement in which you are logically and systematically winning the argument, which means you are also winning the legislation. Now, this is important to recognize because in states all across America, there are organizations that are the sister organizations to you. And many of them are great people and they fight hard. And some of them in solid red states are not winning the kind of victories that you are here in Connecticut. And it speaks very well of the leadership, of the staff, but I would also venture to say it speaks very well of the extraordinary undergirding of prayer that I believe has to give really rise to what you've been able to do in this state. And later tonight, when you have an opportunity to generously give to the ongoing work of the Institute, I hope that you'll do it, not out of some sense of, oh, okay, I guess we got to. The chicken was good, so let's go ahead, cough up some coin. But you'll be doing it because it is having an impact in your state. And the net result, human lives are being saved before they're taken in the life of the womb. Lives are being saved that aren't subjected to an ill-planned suicide, that a person might have a more rational thought later to change a mind and say, you know what, I want to live after all. This is a life and death thing. Now look, we're only 12 days away from the election. This organization is a 501c3. I'm not here to endorse a candidate or even a political party. I obviously have to share who I am, what I do. That would, I think, be standard. It would be a little hard for me to come here and say, I have no particular position on any of the issues. I tell people on Fox News all the time, I said, I'm not a journalist. I'm not even playing one on television. No, there's nothing objective about me. I'm incredibly biased. I am unapologetically pro-life, pro-family, pro-marriage, pro-small government, low taxes. That's who I am. But tonight we're not here to celebrate a political party or a political candidate, nor will I endorse a political candidate from this podium. As soon as my speech is over, if you want to meet me in the hall, I'll tell you exactly where I'm going with all this. But not here. Because there's something even bigger. And I want to be the first to tell you that regardless of how the election turns out, and clearly I care deeply about it, but regardless, the work of the Family Institute of Connecticut is going to be just as important today after the election as it was before. Because whoever is president does not change the makeup of your legislative body, nor of the needs and the issues that are at each state level. And the real battles that we're winning, or losing as it may be, are frankly happening at the state level because Washington is in an absolute paralysis. And there are days I'm glad for that. Given the insanity of the people who run the place, I'm kind of glad that they can't get anything done. Now, I'm not sure how I got invited to speak here tonight. I overheard a conversation Peter was having with one of the board members. I don't think he intended for me to hear it. I heard him say, how come you got Huckabee? And Peter said, well, you know, we do the banquet every year, and we do the reports, and we always have a speaker. And, you know, we really didn't want much of a speaker, and we figured he was as near nothing as we could probably get. That's okay, Peter. I know rejection. Especially after this last year, I know rejection. In fact, I really did not want to be here tonight. I'd like to have been on the campaign trail as the Republican nominee. That was my thought. You know, I have people that do come up to me and they'll say, I just want you to know Donald Trump was not my first choice. I said, darling, he wasn't my first choice either. Because I was. So I get all that. The hardest part for me was I was supposed to speak at the Republican National Convention in Cleveland this summer, and I'd gone back to work for Fox News doing commentary, and Fox told me, look, if you're our employee, we can't let you go on the stage and give a speech as part of the program. And I was thinking to myself, okay, let me see if I get this right, because what, somebody might find out that I'm a Republican? Boy, that'll shock America, won't it? But okay, their rules, their paycheck, I get it. So I had to turn down the opportunity. But I want you to know, I had an absolute stem winder of a speech all prepared. I was ready to deliver it. And I thought, since I couldn't give it at the convention, I'd at least give you the opening line of that speech. Because it went like this. I am happy tonight to accept your nomination. No, you know, you go from being on, you know, every paper in the world running for president, then all of a sudden your campaign is over. And then you have this experience where people come up to you and they look at you and they try to figure out, now, I know you from somewhere. The worst is when they just flat out say, hey, didn't you used to be somebody? True story. Last week, I'm on a plane 4 or 5 days a week, and last week I was on a flight from Atlanta And I was going to Minneapolis, and I'm sitting there in an aisle seat, and the lady's coming down the aisle. She stops and just looks at me, and she says, "I know you." Well, lovely, I'm glad you do. And she said, "Yeah, I know who you are, aren't you? You're a politician." I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, I knew it. You're Mitt Romney, aren't you?" I swear, that happened. I said, "No, ma'am, I'm Al Gore. And it's getting really warm in this airplane here. I think it's a global warming. You better go back and sit down." Now, I have people all the time that they'll come up, and let me just give you a tip. If you don't know who somebody is, don't ever say this. "Who are you?" Because it kind of is insulting. Because here's the problem. If you say, "Oh, I'm Mike Huckabee," and they say, "Never heard of you." I mean, that is like a gut punch to your ego. So just say, I've really enjoyed the things you do. Doesn't matter what it is. But there are those moments that it can be a little bit unsettling. Now, at my church every week, I have a unique job. Everybody in our church, you join the church, you got to do a job. You can't just join and sit and listen to the sermons. And I love that. I think it's the way every church ought to be, that you got to sign up for something. So the only thing they thought that I might be able to do without messing it up was I drive the golf cart in our parking lot, and I take people with babies and some of the older people. Not that any of you would ever get to ride in my cart since you're not old enough, but I drive them from their cars up to the lot. Now, we live now down in the panhandle of Florida, which is a tourist area where a lot of people, several million people, come to visit every year. So it means that every Sunday, we got our regular church people, but about half the congregation are visitors, people coming from all over the country to spend some time down on the beach. So people will get in the cart, and a couple of ladies from Alabama got in several weeks ago, and as we're driving toward the church, one of them said, "Has anybody told you that you look a lot like that Mike Huckabee guy?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, I get that a lot." She said, "And you know what? You sound just like him, too." I said, "Do I really?" She said, "Yes, you do." A few seconds later, she said, "Are you Mike Huckabee?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "You are not." Now when somebody comes up and says to me, "You look like somebody familiar. Do I know you from something?" I said, "Well, a lot of people say I look just like Brad Pitt." That really messes them up, and they just go, no, I don't think so. I wish I had known, by the way, that you had these two big screens here, because I got 5 grandkids, and I would have brought hundreds of pictures, and I would have shown you all during the speech. It wouldn't have cared what I said. You would have loved seeing the pictures of these grandkids of mine. I'm grateful for them for so many reasons. I mean, first of all, being a parent was tough. Being a grandparent is just sheer joy. I mean, it is absolutely magnificent, and I love every minute of it. And one of the things that I'm so grateful for having grandkids is that it gets me out of conversations on a long flight where somebody sits to me and they think they're going to talk to me for 3.5 solid hours and just chat me up about what they think ought to be going on in Washington. And when they get, to a certain point, I say, if you're that good at this, you should get on the ballot, you should run, you should win, and you should fix it, because anybody with that much opinion definitely is robbing the country by not getting on the ballot. But I usually am not that cruel. I found another way. This is why I love my grandkids. When somebody really just starts wearing me out, I just pull out my iPhone and say, "Hey, I got about 3,200 pictures of my grandkids. I want to show you." And boy, right then, they put on the headsets, they got something to do, and I'm able to get some work done. But I'm grateful to be a grandfather, 3 adult children. God has blessed Janet and I. We've been married for almost 43 years, and the Lord has been so good to us. Are you clapping because we've been married a long time, or you think, boy, what a woman to put up with him for 43? But we have 3 children, and then they've given us 5 truly wonderful grandkids, and all of you are grandparents understand this, but they just bring laughter to our lives. Because you know what? We can laugh at all the stuff they do. We don't have to worry about cleaning it up. And we feel some sense of vindication because we are watching our children get the same business that we got from them. And this is pure joy. But it's also the perspective that little kids have. Our kids are all little. Oldest one is 5. We have a 4-year-old. And then we have 2 3-year-olds and a 1-year-old. So those are our 5 grandkids, all in that little cluster. My little 3-year-old grandson, my daughter's middle child, his name is William Huckabee Sanders. And so they call him Huck. That's his name, Huck. Huck Sanders. His sister is Scarlett. If that's not a Southern bunch, I don't know what is. But Huck is 3 years old, just turned 3 a week and a half ago. I'm on TV a lot. And Huck will see me on TV, and a couple of weeks back, I was on TV, and he turned to his mother, and he said, "Papa is on TV, just like Mickey Mouse." I mean, he didn't get the whole thing that it's a little different than Mickey Mouse, but to him, the fact that I'm on the same box in his living room that Mickey Mouse is on means I must be pretty cool. I'll never tell him anything differently than that. I'm glad to hear you laughing tonight. We need to. We really do. Sometimes we get so serious and we get really, frankly, a little despondent about things happening in our country. I find it sometimes hard not to be. When I saw the news reports this week that a pastor in Georgia, who also is a state employee, was fired from his job at the state because in his pulpit, he's a Seventh-day Adventist, and in his pulpit, he preaches what the Bible says about life and about marriage, about what you would expect a pastor in an evangelical church to say. The Attorney General of the state of Georgia ordered him to turn over all of his sermons, his sermon notes, even his Bible, so that they could inspect it to see. And then they fired him. You hear people say, you know, if we don't do something as a country, there's going to be some real consequences for people who are believers. Folks, there's already consequences for believers. 2 years ago, I went to Houston and I stood with what we call the Houston Seven, the pastors, who were ordered by their mayor to turn over all of their notes, all of their sermons, and all of the correspondence that they had had with their parishioners because they had dared to oppose a local ordinance that would have made it law that you had to let people go to whatever restroom they wanted, regardless of how God had biologically assigned them. And these pastors said, no, God created male and he created female. And men go to the men's room and women go to the women's room, and that's how we will practice it. And the mayor was angry and subpoenaed, think about this, used the power of government to subpoena the sermons and the notes and the correspondence. Now, this is privileged communication, a pastor and his parishioners. So first of all, that was so blatantly unconstitutional, it wasn't even funny. These pastors resisted. They went to court. They eventually won. But folks, let me tell you, believers in this country, not in one or two places, but across America, are under siege. A couple I got to know in Washington State, Melissa and Aaron Klein. Lovely young couple, small children. Melissa's a whiz in the kitchen making baked goods, and they opened a bakery, a nice bakery, and they were very successful in making a good living until someone came in and said, we want a cake for our same-sex wedding. And Melissa and Aaron, they were very kind about it. They were not belligerent or rude. They just said, we'll be happy to make a cake for you, but we can't make specifically a wedding cake that would celebrate a same-sex wedding because we're believers, we're Christian, and we just can't do that. We can't give that affirmation. They got sued. And the state of Washington and the Human Rights Division fined them $180,000 because of their refusal to make a cake. We've seen this with florists. We've seen it with caterers, people who run wedding chapels. We are in a different world than we've ever been before. In the election that comes up, again, I don't pretend in any way to try to tell you how to vote, or this is not about the parties, but you need to ask yourself, how will this country move forward in terms of religious liberty? Folks, if we lose religious liberty, which is the foundation of not just the First Amendment, but all of the Bill of Rights, and the reason it is because if the government can restrict what you can believe, it can restrict what you say, with whom you can associate, it can restrict where you go, it can restrict whether or not you send your kids to a particular school. If the government can say, oh, you're free to believe, up to a point, which, by the way, the insistence of the Obama administration to groups like the Little Sisters of the Poor, a wonderful organization, a group of sisters who take care of elderly people. And there were people in the administration that wanted to force the Little Sisters of the Poor to provide abortion coverage in their health plans. Now, look how irrational this is. That a group of nuns would need abortion coverage. That's like me needing coverage for anorexia. The doctor once told me I had it. He said, but I think we've caught it in its earliest stage. This is how ridiculous this has become. The Hobby Lobby case was another example of a privately owned company in which the company, the Green family, who owns that company, pays their employees more than anybody in the retail business. Anybody. They give them more generous benefits than anybody in the retail business gets. And yet, it wasn't enough because the government wanted to insist that they provide abortifacient drugs as part of their prescription drug coverage. They provided 19 of 23 different birth control medications, but they would not provide one that was an abortifacient. And as a result of that, they got sued by the federal government. Now, think about this for a minute. When the government can tell you the limit to which you can believe and practice your faith, we no longer are the United States of America living under the Constitution with the First Amendment rights of religious freedom and liberty. I got into politics, quite frankly, not because, I just needed something to do. I had a pretty good life going on. I liked it. It's good and comfortable. I don't have time to go through the whole long story of how this process and pilgrimage happened. But I've said to people many times, look, I'm not a person in politics who became pro-life because he got into politics and thought, well, I got to do that in order to get elected. I did not become pro-life because of politics. I got into politics because I'm pro-life. And I said, I am not going to stand by and watch silently as we see more than 1 million unborn babies a year die in what ought to be the safest place on earth, the womb of the mother. We've got to stop this. And for me, this goes to the very heart of who we are as a nation. It also goes to the heart of who we are as a civilization. There is nothing civilized about the notion that we would take and dismember an unborn child solely because somebody decided that it would be an inconvenience or a disruption to their lives, socially or emotionally. I want you to think about something. If we ever really enshrine this notion that we can end a human life at the front end because it represents a financial burden or a social disruption, and that's often the case that we're told, well, I can't afford this baby. Or, hey, I won't be able to finish law school. My boyfriend will abandon me if I carry this baby. My grandmother will be angry at me. You see, one of the things that I learned in my 11 years as a pastor, which was kind of the middle point of my adult life, I realized that there are two victims in every abortion. One of them is obviously the baby, but the other one that we never talk about, that we need to have great compassion for, is the birth mother, who often is talked into the procedure, not because deep down that's what she wants, but people around her, her friends, her family, her boyfriend, people are pressuring her, and culture and society are pressuring her and trying to tell her the big lie that this isn't really a human being. It's just a blob of tissue. And it's later when she finds out that that baby had a heartbeat in just a few days that it begins to sink in what happened. And that's why I'm always wanting to be very clear. I never want to see us castigate those birth mothers. I want nothing but compassion and broken-hearted, tender care given. But I want to stop the slaughter. And organizations like the Family Institute of Connecticut are on the front lines of the battle. Because at the state level is the only place where we're going to win any victories whatsoever. Forget about the federal government. It's not going to happen. Now, I wish it would. And by the way, if you think that the overturning of Roe v. Wade is the answer, it is not, because all Roe v. Wade does is it took the abortion decision away from the states and put it at the federal government. If it returned to the states, a lot of states, abortion would be more prolific now or then than it is already now. It would not help. Now, states like Arkansas, it would be prohibited completely. You see, I think we need to look at something bigger and more encompassing to deal with this. The Declaration of Independence, upon which our country was founded, says that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all of us are created equal, endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This notion of the equality of each of us as human beings is the very foundation of what makes America the most unique place in the history of mankind, because in most cultures and countries and traditions, people are not deemed to be equal. Value is placed upon what your last name is, who your father was, how much land you own, what type of occupation do you have, and your value or your worth was deemed by those external things. But our country was founded on the notion that there is intrinsic worth and value in every human being, and that even though we may not do the same things or have the same amount of land or the same last name or the same wonderful blue blood heritage, the truth is we are all equal. And what we have been endowed with, that equality, came from our Creator. This was unique in the history of mankind to have a government based on that premise. If that is true, my friend, then the only question we need to resolve is the unborn child a human being or is it not? Because if it is a human being, it is equal to every other human being, and under the 5th and the 14th Amendments of the Constitution, it is entitled to due process before you can take its life or liberty. You cannot take the life of an unborn child. I argued from the stage of the debates that as president, I would invoke the 5th and the 14th Amendment and make those who want to provide abortion take us to court, let them be on the defense finally, and let's establish that based on our premise of the equality of every human being, that every person is a human being and a person from the moment of conception. And they would argue, well, it's not a person. Well, then you tell me when it is. Biologically it is, because the DNA at conception is exactly the DNA that person will have if they live to be 95 years old. It's a person. I mean, if it's not a person, what is it? A puppy? A stalk of broccoli? A porpoise? No, a person. It's all it ever can be. It's what it is. Say, well, it's not the same as it will be. Look, I look a little different than I did when I was a week old, too. But it's still me. Folks, we should win this battle, and we can. And by the way, the best friend we have in winning the battle for life is science itself. And by the way, one of the reasons that now polls, both Pew and Gallup, show that more Americans identify as pro-life than not, you know why? It's because younger women are more pro-life than their mothers and grandmothers, and that's largely due to the advent of the sonogram and the fact that science is irrefutable in reminding us that, yes, inside that mother's womb, that is a person. And folks, let us not grow weary in well-doing. We can win this battle, and we can change the course, but I don't believe God in heaven will ever be able to fully bless this country until we are on our faces in repentance for the 60 million we've killed, and we stop the slaughter, and we start presenting him babies rather than bodies. I know sometimes that even as I speak, it may seem like I'm a little pessimistic, given that the political climate is what it is, and it seems like the extreme court decides that they're a legislative body rather than simply a judicial body. I believe that their decision in Obergefell was absolutely unconstitutional, should have been ignored by the other two branches of government. You say, oh, well, they can't do that. Of course they can. That's what they were given the constitutional responsibility to do, for heaven's sakes. And so I want us to see us have a Congress and an executive branch that takes seriously the real checks and balances, and they do not subscribe to this notion, which is not a constitutional notion, of judicial supremacy, which says once the courts rule whatever they rule, that it is now the law of the land. Folks, go back and read Jefferson, Jackson, the people who actually were there when the Constitution was being written, and they will be very clear in telling you that there is no such thing as this judicial supremacy in which the courts rule, and that's the last word. The people are the last word in this country, not any of the three branches, and each of them are equal and responsible to the other two. But this is why we really need what you do tonight to be significant. I don't live in Connecticut, but I care what happens in Connecticut. Because if you can win battles here like you're winning, the kind of battles that you shouldn't be winning, do you have any idea that it is having the rippling effect across the other 49 states of this nation? You're not on the trailing edge, you're on the leading edge. And tonight, when you make a contribution to the Florida Institute, the Family Institute of Connecticut, I said Florida, didn't I? I have envelopes for that. I will give those out later. Sorry, Peter, I'm going to do a little double dip. When you give tonight to the Family Institute of Connecticut, let me tell you what you're really doing. You're helping to win the battle, but you know what the practical effect is? Can you imagine anything so boring as going down to the state capitol day after day during a legislative session and sitting through hundreds and hundreds of hours of committee meetings listening to see if something will be put in a bill that would be a threat to your family, your freedom, or your faith? Do you want to sit there and do that? First of all, you don't want to. Secondly, you don't have time. And third, if you did, you'd probably go berserk. I mean, only crazy people can do this. I'm sorry, Peter, but it takes a real nut to sit through those. I mean, they're boring. Most of the time, it's like watching paint dry, because a lot of stuff, and reading thousands and thousands of pages of legislative proposals before it ever even gets to the point of having the debate, cutting it off before it ever starts growing enough to be a threat. Who does that? You do every time you write a check or make a contribution to the Family Institute of Connecticut. You do it, you just don't have to go down to the Capitol and put up with it. Now, tonight I'm going to give you a choice. Either you volunteer to go and sit through hundreds of hours of legislative committees and read thousands and thousands of pages of some of the most boring stuff you've ever seen in your life. You either do that, or tonight you get your credit card or your checkbook out and you say, thank God those people are willing to do this, because I don't want to. And then be grateful that the way they're doing it is winning, and it's effective, and it's making a huge difference in your state. You're not giving money to help the people in California. Lord knows they're probably too far gone. I've been there recently. But you can make it happen where you live, where your kids are being educated, where the people that you see in the aisles of the supermarket, that little baby in the basket, maybe a baby you helped save. And when you get to heaven, maybe you'll get introduced to all the people that are there because you got involved. Look, I understand the pessimism that exists with many people. I refuse to give up. And I've had people say, well, what happens if this individual gets elected? We keep the fight going. I was speaking Monday in Jacksonville, Florida. Interestingly, it was a group of insurance executives at a corporate event. But one of the questions, a guy said, I just want to ask you, look, he said, if this thing looks like it's just going off the rails and our country keeps going downhill and there's not much we can do, he said, I know you're a Christian, and he said, I am. Is there a point at which we just say, hey, I think it's getting near the end? Lord's about ready to close this thing up, shut it all down? He said, is there ever a time? And I said, I don't know for you, but I can tell you for me, no. Because God has never told me when that moment is going to be. The only thing he told me is that when he comes back for me, he wants to find me faithful. Whether I'm winning or not, he better find me faithful. I've often said, on my tombstone, I want 6 words to be there, if in fact they are true. Because whether people knew my name or whether I had wealth or poverty, these 6 words will determine whether or not my life was a success. Here are the 6 words. I want them to be the words that God would say about me. Well done, good and faithful servant. And if that can be said of you or me, the smile of God is upon us. And how many frowns do I get when I send out a tweet or a Facebook post? More than you want to know. I could care less, because I'm not playing for my critics. I'm playing to see my Father's face with a smile and him saying, well done, good and faithful servant. Tonight, when you get out your checkbook and your credit card, however you give, I hope you feel the smile of God, that even your gift, he says, well done, good and faithful servant. Peter, God bless you and the staff and these wonderful people who support the work that you're doing. And to all of you, thank you for making a tremendous difference in the United States of America, starting right here where you live in Connecticut. God bless you.